Hey guys, tonight we're stepping inside one of the most elaborately choreographed social performances in American history, the 1950s suburban formal dinner party, where a single evening of hosting could cement your reputation or quietly, permanently destroy it. Not a casual get-together, not a potluck. A white tablecloth, 12 forks, ivory candles only, savory gelatin served without apology production that took 3 days to assemble and about 40 minutes to eat. If this is the kind of wonderfully exhausting historical spiral that helps you drift off, take a moment to like and subscribe. To whoever suggested tonight's topic, thank you, genuinely. Wherever you're listening tonight, I hope there's no tablecloth nearby being ironed flat and measured with a ruler before company arrives. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And wherever you are, it's almost certainly the small hours, somehow it always is, which fits because the formal dinner party also ran 2 hours later than anyone wanted. So dim the lights, put on a fan if the quiet's too loud, settle in, and tuck the blanket up under your chin. Maybe resist the urge to count your flatware. Have you ever stopped to picture what hosting a dinner party was really like? Back when the etiquette books ran to 12 pieces of flatware per person and your neighbours lived in the exact same house? How did a woman prepare a 6-course meal, polish the silver, press the tablecloth to mathematical precision, and still appear at the door at 7 o'clock looking like none of it had happened? What do you do when a guest doesn't RSVP and the seating chart depends on it? Could you survive serving a gelatin mold packed with shrimp and canned vegetables to 8 adults who received it with complete sincerity? The ivory candles, why specifically ivory, and who was checking? Did the husband do anything, or did he just stand near the liquor and feel ceremonially important? And what happened to the hostess after the guests went home and there were 12 place settings of china, silver, and crystal standing between her and sleep? Congratulations! As of right now, you've woken up in a brand new Levittown house in the spring of 1954. Your house is exactly 750 square feet. Your neighbour's house is also exactly 750 square feet. The dinner party is in 4 days and the silver needs polishing. Good luck. You owe the Hendersons a dinner. They had you over in March, and it is now May, and the unwritten ledger that governs your street has been keeping score the entire time. A reciprocal invitation is expected within a reasonable window, and reasonable has already begun to stretch. You cannot simply thank them and move on. The favour must be returned in kind, at your table, with your china, on an evening you have not yet chosen. You sit down with a calendar and begin to understand the size of what you have agreed to. Let's talk about where you live. You live in Levittown, New York, or somewhere that functions exactly like it. A development of nearly identical houses built on nearly identical lots, sold for $6,990 each to veterans with GI Bill mortgages and a reasonable optimism about the future. William Levitt built 17,447 of them between 1947 and 1951. The floor plans are the same. The square footage is the same. Your neighbour's kitchen is your kitchen, reflected in a slightly different wallpaper. This matters because it removes all ambiguity. Nobody on your street can claim they didn't have room for the good china. You all have exactly the same room. The Hendersons know this. The Pattersons know this. Everyone on the block can benchmark your performance against their own capabilities with the precision of a building inspector. It's less a neighbourhood and more a controlled experiment with casseroles. An invitation goes out first. Emily Post's Etiquette, 10th edition, 1960, sold in quantities that suggest a national anxiety disorder, and Amy Vanderbilt's Complete Book of Etiquette, which moved over 650,000 copies in its first year alone, both agree on the timing. Formal invitations require at least 2 weeks' notice. The wording is third person, not, we'd love to have you over. Something more like, Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Holloway requests the pleasure of your company at dinner on Saturday, the 14th of June. Gerald Holloway writes, none of this. You write all of it. You address the envelopes by hand and mail them on a Tuesday. Then you wait. A written reply is expected within 2 days. Not a phone call, not a wave from the driveway. A written reply, returned by post, confirming or declining, with equal formality. Guests who fail to do this are described in the etiquette literature as a source of social anxiety, which is a very measured way of saying that Barbara Merritt from Sycamore Court still hasn't replied, and it has been 5 days and you cannot finalize the roast order, and you are thinking about it more than a person should think about. Anything. The correct number of guests is 6 to 12. Fewer feels insufficiently festive. More becomes unmanageable without hired help, and you don't have hired help. You have yourself, your good judgment, and a gravy boat that lists slightly to the left. 8 guests is the consensus sweet spot, ambitious enough to signal effort, small enough that you can theoretically serve everyone before the first course gets cold. Nora Schaefer, 2 doors down, throws her invitations in a basket on the kitchen counter and responds to them when she feels like it. You know this because she once mentioned it at a PTA meeting the way someone might confess a parking violation. The table went quiet. Nora Schaefer does not receive as many invitations as she used to, and she seems genuinely puzzled about why. You write the date in the calendar, you draw a small circle around it. The circle means it's real now. 12 to 16 hours of preparation spread across 2 to 3 days, beginning with the silver, heavy, cold, and faintly tarnished from the last time you swore you'd put it away properly. You start the guest list, and the first rule arrives before you have written a single name. A proper formal dinner seats 6 to 12 people. Fewer than 6, and the evening reads as thin, almost apologetic. More than 12, and you cannot manage the table without help you do not have. So you work inside that window, and then a second rule lands on top of the first. The couples have to balance. Every man needs a woman beside him, every seat its counterweight, and a single guest left over throws the entire arrangement out of true. Let's talk about the arrangement itself. Husband and wife are not seated together. They are seated at opposite ends of the table, which sounds romantic until you realize the purpose is to prevent them from conducting a private conversation in public, which is considered bad form. The Hendersons go down the far end. The Millers split across the diagonal. You place Douglas Whitmore, who is technically attending without his wife, who has a head cold, between 2 married women, and hope nobody notices the number problem you've been quietly solving for 40 minutes. They will notice. Eleanor Whitmore will hear about it by Tuesday. The host and hostess anchor their respective ends, which gives the table a kind of presidential geometry. You face your husband from 12 feet away across white damask, a centerpiece of low flowers, pale, fragrant, and deliberately short, and 8 place settings that together contain more silverware than some kitchens own outright. The flatware is arranged outside in by order of use, so the guest works inward through the courses the way you'd peel an onion, if onions were made of sterling silver and social consequence. The fish fork is different from the salad fork. The fish fork is always different from the salad fork. The salad fork has opinions about being confused for the fish fork. Amy Vanderbilt's 1952 guide is extremely clear on all of this. 650,000 people bought it in the first year alone, which means 650,000 American households spent 1952 holding the book in one hand and a fish fork in the other, trying to determine if they were holding them in the right order. Emily Post had already been at this since 1922. Her 10th edition lands in 1960 and it changes nothing essential, because nothing essential has changed. The forks are still in the same order. The order is still non-negotiable. You finalize your list at 8. 8 is the number. 8 feels intentional without feeling crowded, festive without requiring a traffic plan. You write the names in 2 columns, 4 couples, balanced, and study them the way a military officer studies a deployment map. The Rileys can't be next to the Garfields because of the thing at the Petersons in March. You know what the thing was. The thing was the comment about the roast. The Garfields know what the thing was. Nobody says anything about the thing, but it governs the seating chart completely. The invitations went out 2 weeks ago. You are now waiting for the last written RSVP, which has not arrived. Margaret Coolidge has not replied. She has had 12 days. The etiquette guides are specific. 2 days is the expected window. You will give her 1 more, and then you will set her place anyway. And when she arrives, she will arrive. You'll greet her at the door, as though the 12 days were nothing, as though you hadn't rearranged the seating chart twice around her absence like a hostess-shaped game of Tetris. Because that's the job. Not just the cooking, not just the flatware, not just the damask hanging 12 to 18 inches over every edge of the table on all 4 sides. The job is also to make all of that invisible. The labour shouldn't show. The 12 days of waiting on Margaret Coolidge absolutely should not show. You write her name into the last seat anyway. The chart is balanced. 8 guests, 4 couples, no one next to the Garfields. You sit down to write the invitations, and you discover that you are not allowed to simply ask people to come. The invitation goes out at least 2 weeks ahead for a formal dinner, handwritten on good notepaper, and it speaks about you in the third person as though you were not the one holding the pen, Mr. and Mrs. Request the pleasure of someone's company at dinner. You copy the wording from the book exactly, because the wording is not yours to improvise. Each card takes longer than it should, and there are 8 of them to write. The book in question is Amy Vanderbilt's, or Emily Post's, or possibly both, because you own both, because this is simply what you do. The 2 books are thick, certain, and quietly contradictory. They don't quite agree on everything, which is the kind of information you absorb like a minor electrical shock and file away. Vanderbilt is crisper. Post has the authority of someone who was born knowing which fork to use and never once had to be told. Between them, they have sold over 1 million copies in the last decade, which means somewhere in this suburb, every hosting woman is holding the same map, navigating the same terrain, and still somehow ending up lost. The envelope goes out in the mail, not hand-delivered. Hand-delivering would look anxious. The card itself sits inside a smaller envelope, which sits inside a larger envelope, which has your return address written in ink, not typed, because typed is for the office, and this is not the office. This is the other job, the one without a salary or a review or a defined endpoint. The card is basically an HR memo in a floral border, and it has to be perfect before it leaves the house. Then there's the RSVP, a category of dread all its own. The expected response window is 2 days. 2 days to write back, also by hand, also in the third person, confirming that Mr. and Mrs. someone accept with pleasure. You know this. You have sent those responses yourself. You understand the social architecture of the thing, and yet, you wait 3 days, then 4. You pull out your guest list and look at the names. You calculate whether 8 is now going to be 7, or 6, or a number that starts to feel insufficiently festive by Amy Vanderbilt's metrics. The margin is tight. 6 is the floor. Below 6, you're just having people over. A woman named Patricia, sitting 2 streets over, keeps a small notebook where she tracks response times, not officially. Just a habit she developed after the dinner party of 1956 where one couple simply arrived without having confirmed, adding a 9th body to an 8-seat table, requiring the removal of 1 salad fork from everyone's arrangement and the quiet rewriting of the entire seating chart 20 minutes before arrival. Patricia writes the names down and notes the date. It is not a grudge list. She would not call it a grudge list. It is a record of information. The reply that never comes is its own particular problem. You can't chase it. Chasing it is not done. Emily Post is not fuzzy on this point. You sit with the uncertainty instead, recalculating the soup course in your head, wondering if the guest who hasn't replied is coming or not coming, whether you're making too much or just enough, and whether the tablecloth you own reaches 12 inches on every side when the extra leaf is in. It probably does. You measured it in October. The tablecloth does not share your confidence. What you're doing here, letter by letter and envelope by envelope, is building the evening on paper before it exists. The dinner hasn't happened. The table isn't set. The silver isn't polished. The beef isn't ordered. But the guest list is already closing around these 8 names, in your own handwriting, 2 full weeks before anyone rings the bell. You have sent the invitations, and now you wait, which turns out to be its own kind of work. The reply is supposed to come within 2 days, written, in the same formal register you used to ask. RSVP, the books remind you, is a request and not a courtesy you may choose to honour. But some of the cards do not come back. 2 days pass, then 3, and the Caldwells have said nothing at all. You cannot plan a table for an unknown number of people, and the number is currently unknown. The arithmetic turns personal fast. A formal dinner needs 6 to 12 guests. Fewer than 6 and the evening feels insufficiently festive, which is a real category. More than 12 and you need hired help, which runs $5 to $8 for the evening and requires a second conversation you hadn't planned to have. You are somewhere in the middle right now, dependent on the Caldwells' relationship with their mailbox. The non-reply is its own social violation, thoroughly documented in the literature and absolutely unactionable. Emily Post and Amy Vanderbilt agree. You do not telephone to ask. You do not send a second note. You wait, and the waiting has no end date, and your table plan sits on the kitchen counter with a blank where the Caldwells should be. The blank is load-bearing. It determines whether you're setting 8 places or 6. whether the tablecloth hangs correctly on all sides, whether the seating chart works at all. A blank is not nothing. A blank is a small administrative emergency that has been handed to you by someone who simply did not write. Let's talk about what you do with the silence. You don't call. You mentioned it to Norma at the school pickup Wednesday, not asking, just noting, with the precise inflection of a woman who is not bothered, and Norma said she'd heard the Caldwells had been travelling, which is not a reply and is not confirmation and does not help the tablecloth situation at all. Doris Caldwell, meanwhile, has been seen at the A&P on Thursday buying romaine lettuce, which suggests she is not travelling and has opinions about salad and is simply not writing. You revise the seating chart anyway. You make a version with 8, in case they come. You make a version with 6, in case they don't. They live side by side on the counter like competing evidence. Linda Marsh, who has been doing this since the block was built, keeps a small spiral notebook for exactly this purpose. Response times, confirmation dates, a quiet record of who replied promptly and who needed a gentle community pressure event the following spring to remember their manners. She writes in pencil. Not as a threat, just as data. Of course, the Caldwells reply on Friday. A brief note, handwritten, accepting with pleasure, which is the correct phrasing. The card arrives after you have already started bracing for 6, recalibrated the centerpiece down a place setting, and mentally rehearsed a version of the evening that didn't include them. You tear up the 6-person contingency. You keep the 8. The Caldwells are back in the seating arrangement between the Fitzgeralds and a chair that used to be a question mark. You now have a confirmed number. The number is 8. 8 people means 8 place settings of china, silver, and crystal, each requiring up to 12 individual pieces of flatware arranged outside in by order of use. 8 people means a tablecloth that hangs 12 to 18 inches over every edge, ironed flat, which is an operation in itself. 8 people means a roast large enough, a first course of shrimp cocktail multiplied correctly, candles white or ivory and never coloured, flowers kept below eye level so the Petersons can see each other across the table. 8 people, confirmed on a Friday, with the party on Saturday. The math is now resolved. The other math, the 16 hours of preparation distributed across 2 days, the silver that needs polishing, the gelatin mould setting in the refrigerator since Wednesday, that math was always there. It doesn't change with the head count, it only gets specific. You keep 2 books on the kitchen counter now, and you consult them the way other people consult a doctor. Emily Post on one side, Amy Vanderbilt on the other, both thick, both certain, both selling by the million. When a question comes up, and questions come up constantly, you look it up, and the book has an answer, and the answer is specific. There is a correct way to do nearly everything, and the book's agreed in advance on what it is. You are not making decisions here. You are checking your decisions against the record. Post's 10th edition runs to more than 600 pages. Vanderbilt's complete book of etiquette, published in 1952, sold over 650,000 copies in its first year alone. These are not suggestion pamphlets. These are load-bearing documents. Your copy of Vanderbilt has a cracked spine in 3 places and a ring stain on page 147, where you set down your coffee while reading the section on centerpieces and discovered that yours was 2 inches too tall. The flowers had to sit below eye level, not approximately below eye level, below it, so guests could see each other across the table without navigating around a floral arrangement with the spatial presence of a small hedge. Let's talk about the tablecloth. White damask, ironed perfectly flat. The hang is specified, 12 to 18 inches over every edge, on all 4 sides. Not 12 on one side and 15 on another. Uniform. You are the kind of person who now owns a cloth tape measure specifically for this purpose, and you feel nothing about that. The tablecloth does not care about your feelings. It only cares whether it's level, and it has decided you should care too. The flatware section is where the books really commit to the vision. Every piece has its own specified spot, its own distance from the plate, its own moment in the sequence, a dinner fork that is not a salad fork, that is not a fish fork, each one laid out like an instrument on a small surgical tray. You read the diagram twice, then once more, then briefly sit down on the kitchen floor. Gerald Hoffman, your neighbour 3 doors down, once called this setup the most impressive thing he'd ever seen at a table. He meant it as a compliment. You remember staring at him for a moment too long, The candle rules arrive early in both books and take no questions. Candles are mandatory at a formal dinner after 1950. The colour is non-negotiable, white or ivory only, not pale yellow, not cream with a decorative edge, white or ivory. The books have collectively decided that a coloured candle at a formal dinner is a statement. A pink candle is a message, and the message is that you didn't read page 212. Post covers conversation guidance in a section you've flagged with a torn receipt. 4 topics are never to be raised at the table: politics, religion, money, and illness. This leaves weather, children's achievements, recent travel, and careful observations about food, which is a narrower conversational lane than it sounds when you're managing 8 people for 2.5 hours. You are, in this sense, refereeing a game no one admits is being played, while also roasting the beef. You smile and refill the water glasses and redirect Mr. Caldwell, who has the instincts of a man who believes dinner is an appropriate venue for tariff opinions. What the books don't include, and this is the one gap in the otherwise comprehensive literature, is a timeline for the 3 days leading up to the party. That knowledge lives in you, accumulated from Women's Day and Good Housekeeping and the quiet, shared intelligence of every woman on your block who has thrown one of these evenings and emerged, technically intact, on the other side. The books tell you what correct looks like. The women tell you how long correct takes. These are different kinds of knowledge, and you need both. You plan the menu next, and you learn that a formal dinner is not a meal but a sequence. It begins with a first course, moves to soup, possibly a fish, then the roast at the centre, then salad, then dessert, then coffee to close. Each course has its place in the order, and the order is not yours to rearrange. You write it all down in a column, course by course, and count the dishes you will be responsible for producing. The number is larger than the number of guests, and the guests have not even arrived yet. The first course is shrimp cocktail. Every formal dinner in 1955 opens with shrimp cocktail, suspended in a stemmed glass with a little dish of red sauce hooked to the rim, which is simultaneously the most elegant and most confident thing anyone has ever done with a crustacean. You will make the sauce from scratch. The sauce has opinions about horseradish ratios, sharp, briny, and faintly sweet, and those opinions are your problem now. Soup follows. Then, if you're feeling ambitious, or if Amy Vanderbilt is watching, which she always is, a fish course. Then the roast. The roast is the centerpiece, the main event, the thing your husband will carve at the table in front of everyone. He will stand up with the carving fork. The table will go quiet. He'll cut the beef like a man who has been given a very important assignment and is enjoying the assignment very much. You will have produced everything else. He carves. Let's talk about the beef. US beef consumption hit 85 pounds per person per year by 1955, which means beef is not just dinner. It's a national personality. A tenderloin roast for 8 costs $12 to $15 in 1955, roughly $140 today, and you will treat it accordingly. You'll pick it up from the butcher yourself, carry it home with both hands, and give it a place in the refrigerator that nothing else is allowed to occupy. The beef has status. The beef knows it. After the roast comes the salad, dressed simply. A French vinaigrette or green goddess, never ranch. Ranch dressing exists. Steve Henson invented it at Hidden Valley Ranch in California in 1954. Ranch is not invited to this dinner. Ranch is what people put on things when they don't know what they're doing, and this table is a table where people know what they're doing, or are at least performing it with conviction. Then dessert. Then demitasse, those small, insistent cups of very strong black coffee, the kind that arrive in vessels so tiny they seem to be making a point. The men will drift off afterward for brandy and opinions that have gotten louder since cocktail hour. You will smile at this. This is where the gelatin enters the picture, somewhere between the fish course and the roast, or alongside the salad, or as a decorative architectural object on the side table. There will likely be a mold. The 1950s are the absolute peak of American gelatin cookery, and Kraft and General Foods have spent millions of marketing dollars ensuring you understand that suspended cubes of tomato and celery and lime jello represent the pinnacle of sophisticated entertaining. You serve it without a flicker of irony. Your guests eat it without a flicker of irony. The mold holds its shape on the platter with the quiet confidence of something that has absolutely nothing to be embarrassed about. Margaret Halsey, a neighbour 2 doors down from someone you know, once served a shrimp aspic that the women's magazine called architecturally impressive. Margaret was invited everywhere for 2 years after that. Margaret understood the assignment. You count it all up again. 6 courses minimum, 7 if you include the soup and the fish separately, which you should. Each course requires its own dishes, its own serving pieces, its own temperature and its own timing. You're essentially running a small restaurant, except the restaurant has no staff, no commercial kitchen, and one rule above all others: you are not allowed to look tired. You go out for the beef, because the beef is the part of the meal that announces what kind of evening this is. The roast sits at the center of the table and the center of the menu, and in this decade beef is the protein that means something. A tenderloin for 8 costs around $12 to $15, which is not nothing against a household income that has to cover everything else as well. You choose the cut carefully, slowly, the way you would choose anything that is going to be looked at by people keeping score. By 1955, Americans are eating 85 pounds of beef per person per year, not because they're hungry, because beef is prosperity made edible, and you are about to serve 8 people, their annual reminder that you are doing fine. The butcher knows what a tenderloin is for. He wraps it with the gravity of someone handing you something important, which is accurate. And then there's what the beef costs in context. The food alone, beef, shrimp, cream, vegetables, the gelatin mold's contents, the flowers for the centerpiece, runs $30 to $50. Your household income for the year is around $4,400. You do the math quickly in the parking lot and then stop doing it. The math is not the point is the roast. The rest of the shopping has its own logic. The shrimp for the cocktail course, the cream of mushroom soup base, the salad components, endive perhaps or romaine, nothing that wilts dramatically under pressure. And then, somewhere in the produce aisle, the ingredients for the gelatin mold. You pick up a tin of water, chestnuts, a jar of pimento, a can of something labelled seafood medley. The mold will be served at room temperature in a ring shape with a small flag of parsley on top, and your guests will eat it without comment, which is the correct response. This is 1957. The gelatin mold is not a question. Back home, Gerald at the butcher counter handed you the tenderloin with both hands, which felt ceremonially correct. He does this for everyone buying tenderloin, and it still works every time. The hors d'oeuvres need their own afternoon. The rumaki, chicken livers wrapped in bacon, each one pinned around a water chestnut with a toothpick, requires patience and a tolerance for handling chicken liver in a formal context. Trader Vic's has made them fashionable. Your guests will eat 4 each during cocktail hour and feel sophisticated about it. You will have made 48 of them, which takes longer than it sounds, and which involves a smell that lingers in the kitchen until Thursday. The shrimp cocktail sits separately in your mental list under manageable. 6 to 8 shrimp per person, arranged in a stemmed glass like a small chilled chandelier, cold, pink, and reliably uncomplicated. A dollop of cocktail sauce, a lemon wedge. It is the one course that requires almost no improvisation, which is why you love it with a loyalty that borders on personal. The afternoon splits in 3. There is the cooking you do today and the cooking you do tomorrow and the final cooking you do the day of. The beef gets started last, timed backward from 7:30 service, accounting for resting, accounting for your husband's carving window, accounting for the possibility that the oven runs hot, and this happened once before in September and you still think about it. You write the timeline on a notepad and tape it to the inside of a cabinet door where guests won't see it. The cabinet knows what it's holding. It keeps the secret without being asked. You start 3 days out, because 12 to 16 hours of work do not fit into a single afternoon. The schedule is its own document. What gets done the day before, what waits until morning, what cannot be touched until the last hour, or it will wilt or melt or fall. You polish on one day and shop on another and cook across both. And somewhere in there you are also meant to clean the entire house, not only the rooms anyone will see. The clock starts now, and it does not pause for anything else you owe your day. Day 1 belongs to the silver. You pull it from its cloth-lined case, the flatware, the serving pieces, the gravy boat that has never actually held gravy, and you open the Goddard's silver foam, which announces itself immediately, a chemical brightness that fills the kitchen within 30 seconds and was absolutely not designed to be breathed. Your neighbour Margaret, 2 doors down in the identical house, is doing the same thing this week. You know this because the smell drifts. The polishing itself is not quick. Each fork gets attention, each spoon. Amy Vanderbilt, who has opinions about everything, recommends that silver be polished before every entertaining occasion, and Vanderbilt does not say once over lightly. You do this with a soft cloth in small circles, working the tines and the bowl and the handle, and when you're done, each piece looks implausible, polished, frigid, and faintly accusatory. You put it all down on clean towels and you do not touch it again with bare hands. Now the silver has arrived. It is no longer tableware, it is evidence. Let's talk about the tablecloth. It's not a tablecloth, it's a test. The white damask comes out of the linen drawer that you iron it back into after every single use, and it must lie absolutely flat, with no crease the iron missed, hanging exactly 12 to 18 inches over every edge of the table, not 11. Certainly not 19. The authorities agree on this with unusual unanimity, which is how you know it matters. You lay it out, you check all four sides, you find the one corner that's hanging at 11.5 inches, and you adjust it with the quiet precision of someone diffusing something. The centerpiece goes in next. Flowers, always, but kept deliberately low, just below eye level so guests can see each other across the table, which is the whole point, though it does occasionally make the arrangement look like it's hiding. A florist named Gloria on Elm Street cuts everything to the same height with the focused expression of a woman who has heard about the eye-level rule more than she would like. You bring the arrangement home in the passenger seat, holding it level through 2 turns. Day 2 is cooking. The gelatin mold sets overnight, which means it goes into the refrigerator this afternoon with the confidence of something that knows it will be controversial. Inside it, vegetables, possibly shrimp, suspended in aspic with the stillness of a diorama. It will arrive at the table looking exactly like it was constructed, because it was. The guests will serve themselves portions without comment. This is considered sophisticated. It is the kind of dish that photographs better than it tastes, assembled mostly so it can be admired being served. The shrimp goes into the refrigerator separately, arranged over crushed ice in stemmed glasses like tiny pink chandeliers waiting for tomorrow. The rumaki, chicken livers, bacon, water chestnuts, all assembled by hand, sits wrapped on a tray. The beef tenderloin rests, unbothered, taking up most of the middle shelf. It cost $15. It knows. By the time you go to bed on day 2, the house smells like silver polish and cold shrimp and something braised. The candles are out on the sideboard, white, because they are always white, because the authorities have closed that question entirely. The tablecloth is on the table. The silver is laid. You have 12 hours left, which feels like enough, and is not. You take out the silver and begin to polish it, because tarnished silver on a formal table is the kind of thing people notice and do not mention to your face. The polish comes in a tin, Silvo or Goddard's silver foam, and it smells sharp and chalky and faintly chemical, a smell that means a party is on its way. You work piece by piece, fork by fork, rubbing until the metal gives the light back. There are place settings for 12 here, and each setting has more pieces than seems strictly necessary for eating a meal. The pieces themselves are a small army. There's the dinner fork, the salad fork, the fish fork, the oyster fork, that one barely qualifies as a fork. It's more of a suggestion. The dinner knife, the butter knife, the fish knife, the soup spoon, the dessert spoon, the iced tea spoon, and a small fruit knife that will be used for approximately 1 minute somewhere around the 5th course. Amy Vanderbilt would not apologize for any of this. You are laying them out in order of use, outside in, which is the only system that makes structural sense and still somehow requires a diagram. Each piece goes down parallel to the others, a precise 1/2 inch from the table's edge. The fish knife is not the same as the dinner knife. The salad fork is not interchangeable with the fish fork. These are not suggestions. They are the layout, and Mrs. R. down on Elm Court learned this last spring when a guest who had brought Emily Post as light reading paused over her table and smiled in a way that was not a compliment. The silver itself is the real project. You're not polishing because the pieces are dirty. You're polishing because silver tarnishes the moment you glance away from it, slowly going grey and dull and vaguely resentful, like it's been waiting for you to prove something. The cloth comes away grey, then grey again. Then, eventually, the fork begins to reflect the ceiling lamp back at you, and you consider this a win. Now, the gloves you were not wearing. Bare hands leave oils that begin a new tarnish cycle roughly 3 to 5 minutes after you've finished. A household with proper staff would have handled this with white cotton gloves. You're in Levittown in 1958, and your white cotton gloves are wherever you left them after Easter. Gerald, who is your husband, is in the other room. His formal job list for tomorrow evening contains exactly one item. He will mix drinks from 6:30 to 7. The arithmetic, when you finally do it, is not encouraging. The full set runs to 144 individual pieces of flatware, each requiring individual rubbing, rinsing, and drying before it touches the white damask. The fish forks alone take 11 minutes. The demitasse spoons are tiny and somehow take longer. You've been at this for an hour and 40 minutes and the soup spoons are still waiting. Of course, all of this happens again at the end of the evening, in reverse, by hand, in the sink, alone. 7% of American homes have a dishwasher in 1960, and yours is not one of them. After the guests go home, after the coats are retrieved, the goodnight said 3 times in the foyer, the door finally closed, you'll be back here, with the china and the crystal, and all 144 pieces, which is basically the situation of someone who agrees to help move a friend and finds out the friend owns a piano. Except the piano is dinner for 8 and it happens every 6 weeks. A 40th fork catches the light from the kitchen window. You set it down. You pick up the next one. The silver doesn't care that you're tired. The silver has opinions about the light and the light only. You iron the tablecloth the day before, and you iron it until it is perfectly flat, because white damask is the standard and the standard does not allow for creases. The cloth has to hang 12 to 18 inches over the edge on every side, evenly, all the way around, which means you measure it once it is laid down. A crease that survives the iron will sit under the candlelight all evening, visible to anyone who happens to look. So you press it again and again. The cloth does not care how long this takes, and it takes a while. White damask is not a casual fabric. It has a sheen, a weight, a particular way of communicating that you have your things together. A coloured tablecloth at a formal dinner is not wrong exactly, it's more that it says something quiet and permanent. Emily Post has opinions about this. Amy Vanderbilt has opinions about this. The women's magazines have opinions about this. The opinions are unanimous. The centerpiece. It's not a centerpiece. It's a hostage negotiation with your own flower arrangement. The blooms have to stay below eye level so that your guests can see each other across the table, which means everything you want to do with dahlias, the tall, dramatic version, the version you actually like, is wrong. You arrange them, step back, measure them with your eyes, and cut a little more. Margaret Bellows, who lives 3 houses down and has strong feelings about dahlias, would do the same thing and does not mention it. The candles are mandatory. This is not a suggestion from 1953. It is a consensus position held by every authority simultaneously, and they must be white or ivory, not cream, not ecru, not the pale yellow ones that came in a set with the placemats. White or ivory. The coloured tapers at the back of your cabinet stay at the back of your cabinet. They will stay there until someone throws a child's birthday party, which is the only event where the rules relax, briefly, and then tighten again. The geometry of all this is genuinely demanding. The cloth at 12 to 18 inches, the centerpiece below eye level, the candles white, unlit until the moment before guests arrive, then lit in a specific order because candles lit too early drip. And dripping candles are a statement, and it's not the right one. You step back and look at the table. The table looks correct. The table offers no feedback. It has no feelings about this. It simply sits there, waiting to be judged by 8 people who will arrive in 24 hours and immediately begin drinking. The china comes next. Each plate placed at exactly 1 inch from the table's edge. Not approximately, not close enough. The bread plate goes upper left, the water glass upper right, and the wine glass is arranged in a gentle diagonal that implies you have given this thought, which you have, at considerable length. At roughly 11 o'clock last night, your wedding registry was assembled around complete sets for 12, which at the time felt like planning and in retrospect feels like a down payment on a second job. And then you step back again. The whole table, laid and lit and perfectly measured, does look extraordinary. Candle wax and silver and damask and crystal, arranged with the precision of someone who has read the same 4 chapters of Amy Vanderbilt enough times that the book falls open there on its own. It looks like a room where important things happen. It's a Tuesday in Levittown, and all the houses on your street have the same square footage, and your neighbour is doing this exact same thing right now, probably measuring the cloth overhang with a ruler, because she measured it last time. You set each place, and the flatware goes down according to rules of genuine precision. Forks to the left, knives and spoons to the right, everything arranged from the outside in the order the courses will be used. A guest reaching for the wrong fork is technically the guest's mistake, but a place set incorrectly is yours alone. Amy Vanderbilt's guide allows for up to 12 individual pieces at a single setting, and you count them out, one by one, multiplied by every chair at the table. Then you step back and check the symmetry against the book. The book is not a suggestion. It's more like legislation with a dust jacket. The oyster fork goes to the right of the soup spoon. The fish fork goes outside the dinner fork. The salad fork goes inside the dinner fork, unless salad is served after the entree, in which case the salad fork moves to the inside right, and the whole arrangement shifts to accommodate one leaf of iceberg's place in the dinner's timeline. You have a guide open on the kitchen counter, propped against the mixer like a cookbook, except the recipe is for the shape of a table, and there are no substitutions. The knives are their own subspecialty. There's a fish knife, a dinner knife, a butter knife, and a fruit knife, and each one is different in a way that is technically discernible but practically indistinguishable, unless you've been trained by someone who cares about this with a quiet ferocity. Margaret Hoover, a neighbour 2 houses down on Arbor Lane, once spent 45 minutes explaining the difference between a dessert spoon and a cream soup spoon. She held them both. She tilted them toward the light. She set them side by side and looked at you expectantly, as if the bowls would explain themselves. They didn't. The silver had to be polished before you could lay any of it, which is yesterday's problem and already done. You did the full set, all 12 place settings. Forks, knives, spoons, plus the serving pieces, the long-handled spoon, the pierced ladle, the cake server, each piece buffed with a cloth until it reflected your face back at you with the mild judgment of a thing that will accept nothing less. Now you're multiplying. 8 guests times 12 potential pieces is 96 items arranged across a damask surface with 1-inch clearance from the edge, candles lit, centerpiece sitting precisely below eye level, so no one has to peer through chrysanthemums to have a conversation. The visual result is genuinely impressive. It looks like the kind of table you'd see in a magazine, which is where you first saw it, which is why you're doing it, which is a loop you don't examine too closely. The bread plate creates a small crisis. It goes to the upper left of the forks, butter knife placed across it horizontally, blade facing in. This sounds straightforward until you realize the water glass is also upper left, slightly overlapping the zone, and the wine glasses are to the right of that, and you've got 8 chairs in a room designed around a table that seats 6 comfortably. You're running a spatial negotiation with glassware. The crystal is not helping. It keeps sliding 1/8 of an inch to the right and you keep moving it back, and the crystal doesn't apologize, just refracts the candlelight and acts like that was always the plan. You step back again. 8 place settings, each mirroring the others. The outside-in logic means that theoretically, any reasonably informed guest can navigate dinner without confusion. In practice, someone will always pick up the wrong fork. You've already decided to say nothing when they do. You've rehearsed the expression, mild, pleasant, and composed. The face of a woman who has set this table with the precision of a field surgeon and feels absolutely fine about it. You arrange the centerpiece, and the centerpiece has a rule that overrides how pretty it is. It must sit below eye level. The flowers cannot block the faces across the table, so you keep them low enough that 2 guests can see each other clearly over the top of them. The candles go in next, and the candles have to be white or ivory, never coloured, because after 1950, every authority agrees on this, and you are not going to be the one who argues. You light nothing yet. You only place them, and adjust them, and place them again. The eye-level rule sounds like a small thing until you're standing there with a bunch of chrysanthemums trying to decide if 12 inches is low enough or if your centerpiece is technically a visual obstruction. Emily Post doesn't describe it as oppressive. She describes it as considerate. The distinction is mostly a matter of who's doing the arranging. You are doing the arranging, and you've been on your feet since 7 this morning, and the chrysanthemums have opinions about being pushed down into the vase faster than their stems want to go. Candles come next. Each taper sits in its holder like it has been told to behave, and the holders have been polished, because of course they have. The house has smelled of Silvo since yesterday, and the tapers are white, bone white, the kind of white that communicates that you consulted the literature and made the correct choice. Coloured candles exist. You have seen them, You would not put them on this table any more than you would serve ranch dressing from a bottle. Some lines are not crossed. A woman named Mrs. Patricia Holloway, whose dining room is 3 houses down and who hosted in October and used pale blue tapers, is still being discussed. Not loudly. Just in the way the neighborhood has of noting things and not forgetting them, Patricia adjusts her butter dish at every gathering with a kind of focused precision, as though she's hoping her impeccable silverware will eventually rehabilitate the candle incident. It won't. The candles are in the record. The white damask cloth is already down, ironed flat, hanging exactly 12 to 18 inches over every edge. This is not approximate. 12 to 18 inches is the range, and you measured it with a ruler because the ruler exists for this reason. The cloth doesn't drape casually. It extends with authority, which is the effect you're going for. A table that looks like it has always been set this way, like the formality preceded you and simply invited you in. Now you step back and look at the whole thing. Flatware in order, cloth measured, centerpiece low, candles placed but unlit. The room smells like silver polish and fresh-cut stems, and the faint waxy neutrality of taper candles that haven't burned yet. Cool, clean, and faintly green. In roughly 4 hours, it will also smell like cigarette smoke and perfume and roasting beef and your husband's old fashions, which he makes slightly too sweet and no one will mention. Right now, it just smells like preparation. Like a room that has been told something is about to happen to it and is holding very still. The whole table at this moment looks genuinely beautiful. That's the thing nobody mentions in the etiquette books. It is beautiful. 12 place settings, candles standing at attention, flowers held just below the sightline, cloth hanging in perfect horizontal lines to the floor. It looks like a room from a magazine, which is precisely what you were aiming for, because the magazines are where you got the instructions. The magazines and Amy Vanderbilt and the sense that somewhere across town, another woman has been at this since Tuesday and her table is already done. You bring out the china you registered for when you married, the complete set for 12 that took years of wedding gifts to assemble. China, silver, crystal, the 3 of them together are the foundation the whole evening rests on, and the foundation is expensive. A full setup represents real money, the kind that could buy a small car, locked up in plates and goblets and serving dishes. And every piece is breakable. A chip in a rim, a crack in a goblet, is not just damage. It is visible, and it stays visible, and people see it. A complete service for 12 china, silver flatware, crystal stemware ran somewhere between $500 and $2,000 in 1950s money. The median household income in 1955 was $4,421. You did the math at the register and smiled anyway. The wedding registry existed almost entirely for this purpose, which makes it basically a 401 CAC that vests in salad forks and loses all its value the moment you chip one. The silver is its own project. Before every party, not most parties, every party, you polish it. You work through each piece with a cloth, fork by fork, spoon by spoon, and there are a great many forks. Each one polished, each one placed, each one waiting to be used in exactly the right sequence by people who may or may not remember which one comes first. Now picture Barbara Hennessy, 2 doors down, who brings her silver out already done because she polished it the Tuesday before. She sets each fork on the cloth with the kind of focused deliberateness of someone diffusing something that doesn't technically need diffusing. She straightens a salad fork a 1/4 inch to the left. She straightens it back. The salad fork has not moved. The salad fork was never going to move. This is not about the salad fork. The crystal goes at the top right of each setting, above the knives, angled just so. The goblets catch the candlelight when it's lit, which is the entire point. Crystal exists to remind people they are somewhere formal. A water goblet, a wine glass, sometimes a champagne flute if the evening calls for it. Each one hand-washed, hand-dried, held up to the light and checked for spots, because a spotted goblet at a formal table is the kind of thing that gets noticed and not mentioned, which is worse than getting mentioned. The math turns slightly uncomfortable. You have insured the silver. You have not insured your composure when a guest sets a wine glass down on the tablecloth without a coaster. The cloth is white damask, ironed flat, hanging its mandatory 12 inches over every edge. The glass leaves a ring. The ring doesn't come out. You know this already. You set out the coasters anyway and watch people ignore them with the steady, practiced expression of someone who has made peace with outcomes she cannot control. And the china itself, the actual plates, has survived years of careful storage in the padded sleeves it came in, wrapped in felt between uses, stacked in a cabinet reserved entirely for evenings like this one. Every day it sits there. One evening a year, maybe two, it comes out, expensive, fragile, and almost entirely ornamental. The rest of the time it holds its breath in the dark. The china doesn't seem to mind. The china is, in its way, patient. You make the hors d'oeuvres yourself, all of them, because there is no one else here to make them. Deviled eggs, stuffed celery, cheese straws, and rumaki, which is chicken livers wrapped in bacon around a water chestnut, skewered and broiled. Each one is small and fiddly and has to be produced in quantity, dozens of identical little objects assembled by hand at the counter. They will be eaten in the first 40 minutes, standing up, between drinks, by people who will never think about how long they took. You make them anyway, and you make enough. Rumaki first. It arrived in American suburban kitchens via Trader Vic's, the tiki restaurant chain that made Polynesian aesthetics feel sophisticated to a generation of people who had mostly not been to Polynesia. The name is almost certainly invented. The ingredients are a chicken liver, a strip of bacon, and a water chestnut, held together with a toothpick in a kind of reluctant treaty. You broil them until the bacon crisps and the liver stops looking like what it is. They are genuinely good, salty, smoky, and faintly sweet. This does not make them less alarming to assemble at 8 in the morning while still in your housecoat. The deviled eggs have their own politics. The filling must be smooth, piped from a bag or spooned with a teaspoon into each half, then dusted with paprika. Not a heap of paprika. A suggestion. Margaret Ainslow 2 streets over pipes hers with a star tip, which everyone has noticed and no one has mentioned directly. You use a spoon, it's fine. It's going to be fine. The paprika lands slightly off-center and you leave it. Stuffed celery is the fastest of the 4, which means it's also the one that looks the most like you didn't try. The filling is cream cheese or a pimiento spread, smoothed into the channel of each stalk with a knife. The stalks are cut to 3-inch lengths. They are cold. They stay cold. The celery has no ambitions and requires nothing from you emotionally, which at this point in the day is its only virtue. Cheese straws come out of the oven around 11. They are baked pastry twisted with sharp cheddar and cayenne, long and thin and structurally fragile in the way of things you have spent considerable effort on. You made 4 dozen. 3 of them break immediately on the cooling rack. You eat those 3 and count the rest and recalculate how you'll arrange the tray so the gaps don't show. The tray has a plan. The plan adjusts. By 2 in the afternoon you have covered 4 plates in wax paper and stacked them in the refrigerator, which is now so full it has strong opinions about the butter dish. Everything needs to be cold or will need to be warm later, and neither state is currently possible at the same time. You write a note to yourself on the small pad by the stove. The note says, Rumaki 6:15. You underline it twice because last time you forgot and served them room temperature and knew it, and nobody said anything, and somehow that was worse. The hors d'oeuvres are passed by you. On a tray, during the cocktail hour, your husband is running from the bar cart in the living room. His job is the drinks. 1 Manhattan, 1 old-fashioned, 2 martinis with olives, 1 without. He has a shaker and a look of quiet authority. You have a tray of 62 individually assembled objects and a smile that has been on since 5 o'clock. You circle the room. You offer the tray. Someone takes a rumaki and says, "Oh, these are wonderful. Where did you get them?" You say you made them. They nod and eat a second one and turn back to the person they were talking to. The tray is lighter. You go back to the kitchen to check the oven. You build a gelatin mold, and you build it without a trace of irony, because this is the decade when gelatin is sophisticated. Into the trembling shape go vegetables, or shrimp, or shredded things suspended in place like specimens, set firm in a ring and turned out onto a plate. Kraft and General Foods have spent millions teaching you that this is elegant, and you have believed them, and so has everyone coming to the table. The mold has to be made well ahead so it can set, which means committing to it before you know how the rest of the evening will go. The process starts the day before. You dissolve the gelatin in hot water. You add the broth or the tomato juice or the lime-flavored base, depending on which variety of ambition you've selected, and you fold in the contents. Shrimp, if you're going savory, sliced olives, a small cube of cream cheese that will become a pale surprise inside the finished slice. You pour it into the ring mold and place it in the refrigerator, where it will spend the night setting itself into something that looks purposeful. The refrigerator accepts it without comment. The refrigerator has seen things. Underneath it all, the mold. It's a suspension system. It holds ingredients in place the way amber holds a prehistoric insect, perfectly still, perfectly visible, completely committed to its position. There is no adjusting it after the fact. If you've put something in upside down, it stays upside down, preserved forever in the center of your formal presentation like a culinary crime scene. Margaret Hoffer, who lives 4 streets over and has been doing this since 1949, uses a copper ring mold she received at her wedding shower. She runs a thin knife around the inside edge before unmolding, then covers the top with a damp dish towel, flips it in one motion, and taps the base 3 times. It releases. Always. She does this with the expression of someone disarming something. The tap is not optional. The tap is load-bearing. You don't have Margaret's confidence. You have a newer mold and approximately 16 ounces of anxiety setting in the refrigerator alongside the gelatin. The unmolding will happen tomorrow evening, approximately 40 minutes before guests arrive, in the one window of time you've designated for things that can go wrong and be fixed. If the mold doesn't release cleanly, there's no segment 2. You know this. The gelatin knows this. Of course, the recipe calls for this to look effortless. The photographs in the women's magazines show a gleaming copper-colored ring on a bed of lettuce, every shrimp perfectly placed, the whole thing radiating the quiet confidence of someone who has never once had it collapse on the platter. The photographs do not show the towel, the knife, the 3 taps, or the 3 minutes spent breathing through your nose before you carry it to the table. This is basically the goop of its day, expensive-looking, photogenic, and consumed mostly out of social obligation by people who would never say so out loud. The flavor, when it arrives, is cold and faintly briny and slightly sweet in a way that makes your guests smile with their mouths only. Nobody says anything negative about the gelatin mold. This is a firm rule, unwrit, universally understood. You eat the specimen, you comment on the shrimp, you move on. You get yourself ready last, after everything else is done, in whatever time happens to be left. The food has been prepared, the table set, the house cleaned to a standard most guests will never fully register, and only then do you turn to your own face and hair and dress. The afternoon has gone to final cooking and final polishing, and your own grooming has been pushed into the narrow margin at the end of it. You change quickly. The guests arrive between 6:30 and 7, and the clock has been running against you since morning. The dress has been hanging on the bedroom door since Tuesday. You chose it then, while you still had the clarity to make a decision, because by Thursday afternoon your decision-making capacity is fully committed to roast beef and tablecloth geometry. It's the cocktail-length navy, not the sheath. The sheath requires you to stand still, and you will not be standing still. You have places to be. Now your face. It takes 25 minutes on a normal day. You have 12. The foundation goes on while the roast rests. The lipstick goes on in the hallway mirror because the bedroom mirror is occupied by the reality of what your hair has been doing all afternoon near a hot stove. A woman with a hired girl for the evening would at least have someone to hand things to. You have a compact and a door frame and a husband in the other room who has just opened a cocktail shaker and is already having a better evening than you. When the evening is finally over, the compliment you receive will be that the house looks lovely. Both of you know that is not a compliment about the house. You check the table again on the way to the door. The cloth hangs 12 inches over every edge, a requirement so specific it requires a ruler and the kind of focus that belongs in a surgical theatre. The candles are ivory, always ivory. The centerpiece, white spider mums in a low bowl, sits just below eye level, which means the guests will be able to see each other across the table and will therefore be able to witness any moment where you briefly stop smiling. By 6:25 you are circulating with the rumaki, chicken livers wrapped in bacon with a water chestnut threaded in the center, skewered, broiled, arranged on a warmed plate with a small parsley garnish you added entirely on instinct. Your husband is explaining to Gerald and Norma what goes into a good Manhattan. Bitters, he says, as though he invented bitters. You pass the rumaki. Norma takes one and says the house smells wonderful. It smells like silver polish and roasting beef and the candle wax from 12 tapers lit 40 minutes ago, and whatever you put on at the last minute, warm, floral, and slightly wrong, that may or may not have been the right perfume for a Thursday. Wonderful is doing a lot of work in that sentence. The shrimp cocktail is already plated in the kitchen. 6 stemmed glasses, the shrimp draped over the rim like tiny chandelier ornaments, someone refrigerated, and it will go out the moment you move everyone to the table. You know the sequence. First course, then soup, then the roast, then salad, then dessert, then the demitasse, then the men, drifting toward the den with the brandy bottle and a sudden collective interest in Eisenhower. You will be in the kitchen. Before the doorbell rings, the last thing you do is stand in the hallway for 4 seconds and make a specific decision about your face. Not a touch-up, a reset. You are no longer the person who spent the last hour basting meat and checking the tablecloth overhang with a wooden ruler. You are the hostess. She's been ready the whole time. You start the cocktail hour, and for one part of the evening your husband actually has a job. He mixes the drinks, the Manhattan, the old-fashioned, the martini, standing at the bar cart while you move through the room with a tray. This is one of his few formal duties, and it is a visible one, performed in front of everyone present. You, meanwhile, are circulating, refilling, watching the hors d'oeuvres, keeping an eye on the kitchen and the front door at the same time. The division of labour here is clear, and it is not even. The bar cart is his territory. He has positioned himself behind it with the quiet authority of a man who has been given jurisdiction over exactly 1 square foot of this evening. The vermouth is measured with real conviction. Gerald, whose opinion on the correct ratio of vermouth to gin has never once been requested by anyone, delivers it anyway, to no one in particular, while tipping the shaker at a slight angle that he believes distinguishes him from amateurs. He is an amateur. The ice is running low and you clocked it 4 minutes ago. You carry the rumaki. Chicken livers wrapped in bacon, each one skewered around a water chestnut, still warm from the oven, arranged on the tray with a kind of geometric precision that nobody will acknowledge or thank you for. You have been making these since 11 this morning, which is a sentence that would horrify most people if they stopped to think about it. Nobody stops to think about it. The rumaki disappears in approximately 90 seconds, and the tray comes back empty, and you take it to the kitchen without breaking your smile or your stride. Now, the cocktail hour itself. It runs 6:30 to 7, and dinner is at 7:30, not 7, not 8, because both of those signal either impatience or poor planning. The 30-minute gap is a social institution. It exists so conversation can settle, so coats can be taken, so people can complete the small ritual of arriving without feeling rushed directly to the table. The cocktail hour is the only hour of the evening where something can still be fixed. The guests are talking. The room sounds right, the low percussion of ice in glass, the particular warmth of 4 conversations happening at slightly different volumes. Someone has found the bowl of mixed nuts and is working through it with purpose. 20 minutes ago you lit the candles, and they have reached their first clean burn, the wax just starting to soften at the edges, the ivory going slightly gold in the light, warm, soft, and faintly amber. The room looks exactly like the photographs in the magazine. You know this because you have looked at those photographs many times. You are also watching the kitchen door with the peripheral vision of someone who has developed a secondary nervous system specifically for this purpose. The shrimp cocktail is plated and chilled. The first course is handled. What's happening in the oven is between you and the oven has historically had opinions about timelines. It runs hot on the left side. You know this. You have factored this in. You have factored this in for 3 days. Your husband freshens someone's drink. This takes roughly 45 seconds and will be remembered as a convivial and generous act. You retrieve the empty rumaki tray, check the roast through the oven window, adjust a candle that has tilted 2 degrees, and return to the living room carrying a warm expression and a fresh tray of something. This takes roughly 4 minutes and will not be remembered at all. By 7:20, you begin the quiet signal, a slight shift in your posture, a glance toward the dining room, the kind of wordless announcement that trained guests recognize and follow without being told. The group migrates, the bar cart stays behind. Gerald, whose jurisdiction has now officially expired, carries his own drink to the table with the mild look of a man transitioning between departments. The evening moves forward. The kitchen is waiting. You receive the guests at the door as they arrive, and the receiving is a performance that begins the instant the bell rings. Coats have to be taken and put somewhere, drinks offered, names remembered, and the first impression of the house delivered all at once in the space of a doorway. The guests come in a cluster between 6:30 and 7, rarely spaced out conveniently, and you greet each one as though you have been doing nothing all day but waiting for them. The kitchen is still running behind you. You do not mention the kitchen. The coats are the first logistical problem. 8 people produce 8 coats in November, and the coat closet holds 6 if you've moved your husband's good umbrella to the garage, which you did on Tuesday. A couple of coats end up on the guest bedroom bed. This is acceptable because you checked Amy Vanderbilt on the subject, and she didn't specifically forbid it, which in 1955 counts as a yes. Names come next. You know all of them, obviously you've rehearsed, but there's one couple, the Fenners, who you've only met twice, and Richard Fenner has one of those faces that rearranges itself slightly between social occasions. You smile at him anyway with full recognition, and he smiles back with a particular smile that means he also thinks he knows you from somewhere. Both of you know this dance too well. The house has to look as though it arrived in this condition naturally. The dining room is through the archway, and you've timed the lighting so the candles are burning but not low enough to look like you lit them before 4 o'clock. White candles, obviously. Ivory, technically, but white in a sentence. Someone always glances at the table on the way through, the silver catching the candlelight, the damask sitting right. Margaret Hollis from across the street comes through the doorway and stops, taking it in the way you'd look at a car you're deciding whether to envy. Hors d'oeuvres are already circulating because you put them out before the bell rang, which required guessing exactly when the first arrival would come, which you got wrong by 12 minutes. The chicken livers wrapped in bacon are the kind of thing that tastes better when someone hands it to you at a party than it sounds in a sentence, which is doing a lot of work for the chicken liver. Your husband is behind you at the bar cart, and his contribution to this moment is to say, "What'll it be?" in a tone that suggests he's been professionally trained for exactly this. He hasn't. He read the same issue of Esquire you did, but the role is his for the next 30 minutes. The Manhattan, the old-fashioned, the martini with 2 olives, and the understanding that nobody is counting. He has one job. It is a good job. You are doing 5 jobs. The conversation in the front room is starting to find its footing, which means it's currently running on real estate and the drive over. Dinner isn't until 7:30. The shrimp cocktail is plated and chilling, and nothing has gone wrong yet in any way you can confirm. The oven is hot on the left side, but you've adjusted for that. You adjusted for that on Thursday. Someone compliments the flowers on the entry table. You say thank you and mean it in the way that means you spent 45 minutes on those flowers, and yes, you are glad someone noticed. The dining room centerpiece has to sit low so guests can see across it. The entry flowers answer to nothing. They are your one unconstrained act of this entire week. Tall, loud, and gloriously useless. By 10 to 7, everyone is in. The hors d'oeuvres are down to the last 6 pieces of rumaki, which is the correct number to have remaining. The kitchen is running. You don't mention the kitchen. You are, by all evidence, a woman who has been standing in this doorway, in this dress, in these shoes, simply waiting for people she likes to arrive. You decide who sits where, and the seating is a problem you have to solve before anyone actually sits down. The arrangement is not random and cannot look random. It alternates man and woman around the table, separates couples so they will talk to other people, and places the guest of honor in the correct seat relative to the host. You have worked it out in advance, on paper, the way you would work out any puzzle with a single correct solution, and then someone cancels at the last minute, and the whole arrangement has to be solved again. The guest of honor sits to the host's right. His wife sits to your right. This is not negotiable. Emily Post does not frame it as a preference. She frames it the way physics frames gravity. You don't debate it, you work around it. Everyone else arranges outward from that fixed point, like satellites that have been assigned orbits and are expected to stay in them. Place cards handle the communication. Small folded cards, written by hand, in ink, in your neatest script. You address each one formally. Mr. Henderson, not Dave. This is not the kitchen table. Dave is a concept that doesn't exist here tonight. Here tonight there is only Mr. Henderson, who will find his card, take his seat, and hopefully not mention his opinions about the Korean War before the soup arrives. The cancellation arrives by telephone, 2 hours before the guests are due. The voice on the line is apologetic. You say the right things. Of course, please don't worry, we completely understand, while your eyes are already moving to the seating chart on the counter, which is now wrong in 4 places. The alternating pattern has a gap. A woman sits next to a woman. 2 couples are suddenly adjacent. The guest of honor is no longer balanced across from anyone of equivalent standing. You fix it. You fix it, because there is no other option. You cross out names in pencil. You used pencil, because you have done this before, and rewrite the cards in the same neat ink, and by the time the doorbell rings, the table looks as though it was always going to be this way. Harriet Marsh, who arrives at 6:45 and immediately scans the place cards with the focused precision of someone checking a flight manifest, doesn't find a single irregularity. She was looking. She always looks. The seating also has to account for conversation. You are not just arranging bodies, you are arranging the evening. The talkers go where they can carry a flagging end of the table. The quiet ones get neighbours who ask questions. The man who dominates every room he enters gets placed where his dominance benefits the most people rather than drowning the ones on his left. You are basically an air traffic controller for one rectangular table, except you're also about to serve beef to 8 people, and the beef cannot be overcooked. This is where the table itself becomes the argument. A round table is forgiving. Everyone can reach everyone. Conversation flows in any direction. Your table is not round. Your table is rectangular, which means there are 2 ends and 2 long sides, and the people marooned at the far corners of those long sides might as well be in a different room. You angle the chairs slightly. You learn that from a column. You place the most interesting person catty corner from the quietest one and hope the geometry does the rest. The centerpiece sits exactly where you put it last Tuesday when you practiced, low enough that every pair of eyes across the table can find each other without navigating a wall of carnations. The candles are ivory. They are always ivory, that particular shade that is pale, creamy, and faintly yellow under the flame. The night one of them turned up cream-coloured in the box and you weren't sure if cream counted as ivory, you stood in the kitchen for 4 full minutes deciding. It counted. You let it count. The candles don't know. You serve the first course, and the first course is almost always shrimp cocktail, because shrimp cocktail is what the decade has decided a meal should begin with. It comes out cold, already plated, the shrimp hung over the rim of a stemmed glass around a small pool of red sauce. Everything about it has to be ready before the guests sit down, chilled and arranged and waiting, because the first course sets the pace for everything that follows it. You carry the plates out yourself one trip after another, and you do it while looking entirely unhurried. The shrimp are arranged symmetrically. 3 shrimp or 4, evenly spaced, each curled the same direction, hanging at the same angle, like a tiny chandelier made of seafood. The cocktail sauce is homemade because it is 1957, and you are a person of standards, and it sits in the glass below the shrimp in a neat dome, cold, sharp, and faintly sweet, that took you 12 minutes to achieve. The glasses, refrigerated since 11 this morning, are ice cold. From the kitchen to the table is 12 feet, maybe 15. You have done it 6 times in the last 4 minutes. You are wearing heels. The dining room is lit by ivory candles and slightly dim, which makes the single loose edge of the tablecloth, an inch short on the south side, mercifully invisible. You decide not to think about it. You carry another plate. You smile. Mrs. Patricia Olson at the head of the kitchen counter sets each glass on its small plate with the same flat concentration. A surgeon gives a sterile field. She adjusts 1 shrimp with 2 fingers, decides it was correct, puts it back. The lemon wedge on the rim is cut at a 45-degree angle, the same angle every etiquette column in every women's magazine has agreed upon without ever explaining why. The lemon wedge has opinions. The lemon wedge has always had opinions. Of course, the question of who places the first course is one the books handle delicately. In a household with a maid, the maid does it before guests are seated, and the hostess glides in already holding her napkin. In a household without one, which, in Levittown in 1957, is most of them, the hostess places the first course herself while the guests are still in the living room finishing their cocktails. The shrimp goes down, you smooth your dress, you call everyone to the table in a voice that suggests nothing at all has been happening in the kitchen for the last 72 hours. The guests sit. Several of them say something appreciative about the shrimp cocktail. You accept this with the expression of someone who has not been thinking about shrimp placement since Tuesday. Now the table is a specific kind of alive. 8 people in their good clothes, candles lit, the silverware laid outside in starting from 3 inches to the left of each plate, white damask hanging 12 inches over every edge, and 1 inch less on the south side, which you are still not thinking about. The conversation opens with something safe, a recent movie, the weather at the club, the general question of whether the Hendersons are going to extend their patio. Nobody mentions money. Nobody mentions politics. Nobody mentions the fact that the host has just refilled everyone's Manhattan at a pace that suggests he is enjoying his one formal roll of the evening rather too much. You eat your shrimp cocktail standing at the kitchen counter, alone, before anyone has touched theirs. This is not in any etiquette book. It is simply the physics of the situation. The first course plates come back mostly empty, which is the correct outcome. An uneaten shrimp is a small judgment. You collect the glasses on a tray and carry them back through the kitchen door in a single unhurried trip. The next course will be ready in 4 minutes. You smile at the table as you pass and make a small gesture that means everything is fine and also means do not follow me into the kitchen under any circumstances. You bring out the roast and then you step back because the carving belongs to your husband. He stands at the head of the table with the knife and the long fork and slices the beef in front of the guests while everyone watches. It is a small piece of theatre, and it matters that it goes smoothly. You have spent days on this roast. The shopping, the timing, the temperature, and the part everyone will remember is the 30 seconds when someone else cuts into it. You hand him the knife. The roast is beef. It was always going to be beef. By 1955, Americans are eating 85 pounds of it per capita per year, which is not a statistic so much as a religious commitment. A beef tenderloin for 8 runs $12 to $15, roughly what your husband earns in a day, and it sits at the center of the table radiating the authority of a very expensive decision you made 3 days ago at the butcher. The butcher knew you were having people over. He always knows. He has that look. Carving the roast has rules. Your husband has, ideally, practiced, or at least given the impression of a man who has practiced, which is its own skill entirely. The knife must be sharp. This was your job, honing it that afternoon, and the fork must hold the meat steady, and the slices must be even, because uneven slices suggest a household in mild chaos. He cuts, the guests murmur, someone says it looks wonderful, and your husband accepts the compliment with the ease of a man who found the roast in the oven 40 seconds ago. You arrange your expression carefully now. Not tight, not too bright, somewhere in the range of a woman who is calmly delighted by the natural unfolding of an effortless evening. Gerald Whitmore at the far end of the table is already watching the slices land on his plate with an evaluating look that you recognize from the October party at the Hendersons. Gerald has opinions about doneness. Gerald has always had opinions about doneness. You know this. You carved a small test slice from the underside before you brought it out, warm, rosy, and evenly pink. You are prepared for Gerald. If the slices come off even and rosy, nobody says a word. A good roast is invisible, and only a bad one gets a conversation. So you watch Gerald watch the meat, your face already arranged into the small, pleasant nothing you keep for exactly this moment. Your face is the last course anyone will remember. The plates go around. The roast settles into its role as the centerpiece of a meal that has been in motion for 3 days and will be discussed, favorably or not, for approximately 3 weeks. The candles are burning white, because they're always white. The coloured ones sitting in a drawer somewhere, having a very quiet crisis about their purpose. The silver catches the light. The damask lies flat, 12 inches over every edge, as if the table itself has been properly dressed for the occasion and is aware of it. Your husband sits back down and someone pours the wine and the conversation resumes, moving away from the roast and towards something safer. The new development going up past the Hendersons, someone's cousin's remarkable new car. You take your first bite standing at the serving table. It's good. It's exactly right. Gerald hasn't said anything further, which is the closest to a standing ovation Gerald has ever managed. You note this. You will remember it. You serve the entire meal yourself, because the household these rules were written for had a cook and a girl to wait the table, and you have neither. The protocols quietly assume staff in the background, moving plates, clearing courses, washing up out of sight. You are the staff. So you have built a system, dishes passed around the table, or carried out in sequence, timed so that you are seated and composed for as much of the meal as you can manage. You rise between courses, clear quietly, and return, and you try to make the rising look like nothing at all. The 1950s etiquette books do technically acknowledge that some households lack full-time help. Amy Vanderbilt devotes 6 pages to the problem. The solution she recommends is essentially, do it anyway, but faster, and never let anyone see you hurry. 6 pages of instructions whose conclusion is, look relaxed. The chapter doesn't blink. The buffet is the escape hatch. It's technically less formal than a seated meal. In practice, it's a logistical workaround, dressed in a white damask tablecloth and called a preference. You lay the dishes out on the dining table in a long, deliberate row. The guests serve themselves. You circulate, you refill, and at no point does anyone say the word problem, because there isn't one. The buffet is the self-checkout lane of 1950s entertaining, invented to solve the exact same labor shortage, and enjoyed by roughly the same number of people. Barbara, your neighbor 2 doors east, tried the full-seated service last spring. She'd hired a girl for the evening at $6, which covered 3 hours, but not the complete absence of experience. The girl carried the soup course in from the wrong side. Barbara didn't correct her out loud. Barbara smiled and redirected with one hand, and the smile never moved. Barbara slept for 11 hours afterward. Of course, whether you use a buffet or full service, the courses still have to be right. Shrimp cocktail first, suspended in its stemmed glass, because this is non-negotiable. Then soup, then the main course in whatever configuration your system allows. Salad after the main, not before, because this is 1958 and you are not French, and you are not making that mistake again. Dessert, demitasse. The men drift off at some point with brandy and slightly louder opinions about something that has nothing to do with dinner, and you clear the cups. Now, the gelatin mold. It's a course. It's a real course. It can be savoury, vegetables suspended in aspic, seafood in lime gelatin, cream cheese moulded into a ring with olives embedded in the side. Kraft and General Foods spent considerable money in the early 1950s establishing that this was elegant fare. And it worked. You make it the day before because it needs to set overnight, which is actually convenient, which is the nicest thing anyone can say about it. It arrives at the table shimmering gently, holding its shape with a kind of determined structural optimism. You serve it with a straight face. Everyone eats it with a straight face. No one says a word. The mold has the social energy of a centerpiece nobody asked for, photogenic, faintly expensive, and eaten mostly to be polite. The real arithmetic of a servantless dinner is time. 12 to 16 hours across 2 to 3 days is a conservative estimate. On the evening itself, you sit for perhaps 40 minutes of every 2.5 hours at the table. The rest of it you are in the kitchen, plating, tasting, adjusting, heating something that has gone slightly cold and cooling something that has gone slightly warm. The guests see you emerge from the kitchen looking like you have been somewhere pleasant. And then the guests go home and the dishes do not. 12 place settings of china, silver, and crystal wait by the sink, because only about 1 in 14 of your neighbours owns a dishwasher and you are not one of them. The evening was a success. Everybody said so on their way out. You were a wonderful hostess. You made it look so easy. You managed the conversation, because the conversation is also your responsibility, sitting on top of the food and the serving. There are safe topics, travel, the food itself, mild current events, people everyone knows, and there are topics that must not come up at the table. Politics, religion, money, illness, each one can sour a room, and a soured room at your dinner is your failure to have prevented. So you steer. When a subject drifts toward danger, you redirect it gently, before anyone quite notices it was heading somewhere, while also keeping track of the kitchen. It requires more than it looks like. You're holding the thread of 4 simultaneous conversations, monitoring everyone's glass, watching the kitchen door with your peripheral vision, and maintaining the expression of a woman who has not been awake since 5:30 this morning. A Twitch moderator banning bad faith actors does roughly the same work, except she is also personally roasting the beef and she doesn't get to mute anyone. The forbidden categories aren't arbitrary. Politics cracks the table along lines that don't heal before dessert. Religion is worse. It goes quiet in a particular way that outlasts the demitasse. Money is never discussed directly in 1955 suburban etiquette, which is a polished kind of absurdity given that everyone at this table bought their house for $6,990 off the same GI Bill catalogue and can walk across the lawn to your back door. Everyone knows the number. Nobody says it. The dinner table is where you collectively agree not to. Illness gets its own category. Not because it's impolite exactly, but because it sits wrong against the candlelight. Somebody's gallbladder is not what the white damask was ironed for. You are, by this point, something close to a stage director, except the actors don't know they're in a production and would be offended to hear it said. Across the table, Gerald Whitmore is working up to something about Eisenhower. You can see it in the way he's holding his fork. You compliment the flowers, yours, arranged this morning with the stems cut on a diagonal so they drink water properly and stay just below eye level, and ask Dorothy Whitmore about her sister's trip to Montreal, which was lovely apparently, and the Eisenhower thing dissolves into butter. The safe topics have a texture. Travel is reliable. Everyone has been somewhere, or wants to have been, and the geography of other places pulls the table forward without requiring anyone to commit to a position. The food itself is always available as subject matter. A compliment about the beef tenderloin can sustain 4 minutes of conversation, and you can spend 2 of those minutes in the kitchen. A dinner conversation emergency looks nothing like an argument. It looks like a silence that has lasted 3 seconds longer than it should. You feel it before anyone else does, a stillness that settles over the crystal and the candle smoke and the remains of the salad course. You fill it. You have a question ready. You've had several ready since Tuesday, written in a small notebook and then memorized, and then burned, figuratively, because writing down your social contingency plans is the kind of thing you can't let anyone see. And nobody at the table sees any of it. From their chairs, it's an easy evening among friends, the wine moving, the talk flowing, the hostess apparently doing nothing more strenuous than enjoying herself. You letting them think that is the job. The candles burn down by maybe a third over the course of the meal. The wax pools around the wick. The cigarette smoke has fully committed to the curtains at this point. And you are still smiling, redirecting Gerald, tracking the kitchen, holding the whole room in your hands like something fragile, expensive, and entirely your responsibility. You serve the wine, if you serve wine at all, and which wine is one more decision with a right answer. White with the fish, red with the beef, French if you can manage it, because the proper dinner party wines are French and everyone reading the same books as you already knows it. The California bottles are cheaper and considered lesser, and putting one on the table is a statement you may not want to make. Many hosts skip wine entirely and offer cocktails before and coffee after, which is allowed. You weigh what the bottle is going to say about you. The American wine market in 1955 is not the American wine market of anywhere after that. Most suburban households encountered wine occasionally, formally, as a garnish on a meal that already had opinions. The liquor store has French names on the shelf and the prices are high, and the labels are in a language that offers no assistance. A Burgundy is correct with beef, dark, heavy and severe. A Chablis is correct with fish. Whether you're pronouncing either of them correctly is, the books agree, less important than not serving rosé. Serving temperature is specific, it is documented, and it is one more thing you can get wrong. Red wine is served at what the guides call room temperature, which in a house filled with a hot oven and 8 warm bodies and lit candles means something slightly different from what the books had in mind. The bottle has been sitting on the counter since noon. Nobody will say anything. You will know. The white wine needs to be chilled, which requires the ice box to have room, which requires the icebox to have been cleared of the shrimp cocktail glasses and the aspic mould and the cream for the coffee and whatever else is waiting in there like luggage in a very small airport. A neighbour, Mrs. Pauline Breck, solves this by chilling her white wine in the garage in November. In summer, she just serves red and calls it a theme. Of course, there is the question of the glasses. Crystal, ideally. A separate glass for water, a separate glass for wine. The wine glass is held by the stem. This point is non-negotiable in every guide published this decade, because a hand wrapped around the bowl warms the wine and broadcasts that you learn to hold a glass somewhere informal. You have 12 stems in the cabinet. You have 8 guests. You spend 40 minutes doing the math on which 12 are least likely to wobble. The pouring is the husband's to do, and he approaches it with the gravity of a man entrusted with the one task all evening that requires no chopping. He will not overfill. He will not drip on the cloth. He has in his way prepared for this. You never drain the bottle on the first pour. This is not thrift. The books are explicit that refilling the glass immediately, without being asked, reads as encouragement toward excess. You are a hostess, not a bartender. The distinction is noted. If no one at the table drinks wine, you've already arranged glasses of water with the same care and made sure there's something for everyone to raise when the host says a brief toast to the guest's health. The toast is expected. It should not be funny. One well-meaning husband in Bethesda tells a story during his toast that is still being retold in Bethesda in 1961. By the time the main course is cleared and the demitasse arrives, small, strong, black, served with a small spoon that exists for no purpose anyone can clearly explain, the wine is finished and the evening is winding toward the living room, and the men drifting toward brandy, and the women collecting near the coffee service, talking about something that isn't politics or money or illness, because those rules do not expire with the beef course. The crystal goes back to the cabinet. The bottle goes in the bin. The decision you made about which label faced outward while it sat on the table for approximately 90 minutes will not be discussed again. Not out loud. You keep your face still when something goes wrong, because something will go wrong and the table will be watching how you take it. A guest decides the beef is overcooked and says so out loud after you have spent 3 days on the meal. In Evanston, in 1953, a woman in exactly this situation cleared the plates without a word, served the next course, and let nothing show, and a journalist who saw it called her composure the most impressive thing in town. That is the standard you are held to. The dish is allowed to fail. Your expression is not. The rule isn't written anywhere, which is how you know it's real. Emily Post covers forks. Amy Vanderbilt covers the angle of the centerpiece. Neither of them writes the chapter called What to Do When Gerald Announces the Beef is Dry While Everyone Holds Their Breath. That chapter lives in your chest, and you drafted it yourself, somewhere between the third day of prep and the moment you carried the roast to the table. You know it by heart. You perform it without rehearsal. When something curdles, the table goes still in a specific way. Nobody moves their fork. Someone reaches for their wine. A second person finds the tablecloth suddenly interesting. Your husband, whose formal contributions to this evening included opening the bourbon and saying the word tenderloin with quiet authority, now discovers something deeply engaging in the middle distance. You are, at this moment, running quiet damage control for 8 adults, except you are also the one who roasted the beef. Margaret Hollis, who clears the plates at these dinners with the energy of a woman who has cleared plates at these dinners before, lifts the offending platter without ceremony and carries it to the kitchen at a pace that is not hurried and is also not slow. She doesn't look at Gerald. The platter doesn't either. It's gone. The salad course arrives. The conversation reconstitutes itself around a safe topic, probably new construction on Elm, and the incident dissolves like it happened in a different house. The training shows now. Not the etiquette training, the deeper kind, the one that started before you hosted your first party and continued every time something went sideways and you filed away what worked. A dropped fork, absorbed. A guest who drank past the point of usefulness, managed. A collapsed aspic, plated sideways and described as rustic. The aspic had no opinion on this. You did not share yours. The real labour isn't the cooking. The cooking ends when the plates go out. The real labour is the sustained performance of having no feelings about what happens next, delivered across 2 hours, in heels, with a smile calibrated to look warm, easy, and entirely unbothered. The women who did this had plenty of private words for it. None of those words were ever said out loud at the table, and when the guests finally go, brandy and slightly louder opinions trailing through the door behind them, you come back to the kitchen. The china is stacked. The silver is waiting. The crystal sits in a row like 12 small accusations. 7% of American homes have a dishwasher in 1960. Yours is not one of them. You run the water. You start with the crystal because crystal breaks and you'd rather know now when the evening is officially over and your face can do whatever it wants. Somewhere, Gerald is sleeping. You serve the salad, and where you place it in the meal is a question the authorities have quietly disagreed about. The French custom puts it after the main course, as a kind of pause before dessert, and Emily Post in this decade agrees with the French. The American habit puts it earlier, alongside or before. You pick a side, and whichever side you pick, someone at the table may notice. The dressing has rules of its own, a simple vinaigrette or green goddess, and not the bottled things now appearing on grocery shelves, which have not yet earned a place here. Ranch dressing specifically is a 1954 invention. Steve Henson developed it at a dude ranch in Santa Barbara, which is a sentence that explains everything about where ranch dressing belongs on a formal table in 1955. It belongs nowhere near this table. You made the vinaigrette yourself, whisked it by hand this afternoon in the small blue bowl, and you will present it without comment as though the alternative never existed. It didn't. Not here. The salad greens are not bagged. Bagged salad greens are still 20 years away from being a thing anyone does, which means you cleaned each leaf individually, tore it at the correct angle, and dried it in a dish towel because wet lettuce is how you announce to 8 people that you panicked. The salad bowl itself may be wooden, which is correct, or crystal, which is also correct. These 2 correct answers are not interchangeable. Dorothy Fenwick, who lives 3 houses down and owns a crystal bowl she describes as her grandmother's, turns very slightly toward wooden bowls when they appear at other people's tables. She says nothing. She doesn't have to. The salad fork is the small one. You already know where it is because you placed all 12 pieces of flatware yourself this morning, outside in by order of use, and the salad fork is either already deployed or waiting, depending on which authority you consulted and which position in the meal you've committed to. The place setting has, at this point, been partially dismantled by the previous courses. Forks have been used. The butter knife is somewhere. The spoon situation is unclear to at least 2 guests who've been quietly guessing since the soup course. They are still guessing correctly enough not to say anything, which is the goal. Meanwhile, across the table, your husband is refilling wine glasses with an ease that is partly genuine and partly because his entire contribution to the evening fit comfortably into about 6 minutes of standing up. Your shoulder aches from whisking. His does not. Gerald Marsh, seated to his left, has just made a confident observation about wine that is slightly wrong. Your husband agrees with him. The wine does not comment. The green goddess dressing, if you've gone that route, contains anchovies, tarragon, and a quantity of mayonnaise that you measured with full sincerity and wrote down in the recipe card in your own handwriting. It is thick, green, and assertive. It has the confidence of something that knows it belongs here and would like you to know it too. Served correctly, from a small pitcher to the left, it lands on the lettuce like a statement. The statement is, I did not open a bottle. The meal begins its descent toward dessert, and the table feels different now. The candles are lower. The cigarette smoke has accumulated into a haze that mingles with the perfume and the ghost of the roast, and someone has told a story that was received well enough to keep the room warm. You move through it, refilling, adjusting, catching the slight tilt of a water glass before it tips, and the salad course holds the evening for its allotted time. Not too long. The gelatin mold is waiting. You close the meal with dessert and coffee, and the close has its own small choreography. Something elaborate comes out. A mousse, a charlotte, a tall layered cake, followed by demi-tasse cups of strong black coffee, served in the living room rather than at the table. And here the evening briefly divides. The men drift off with brandy, the women settle elsewhere, the party splitting along a line everyone understands, and no one says out loud. You move between both groups, because both groups are yours to keep comfortable. The coffee has to be hot and ready the moment it is wanted. The dessert itself is a project that began yesterday. A charlotte requires ladyfingers, a set custard, careful unmoulding, and the quiet prayer that it releases cleanly onto the serving plate rather than arriving in a soft, dignified collapse. A mousse requires timing. A layered cake requires time you technically didn't have. Whatever you chose, it came out of a kitchen that has been active for 3 days, and it has to arrive at the table looking like it was assembled by someone who wasn't particularly rushed. The demi-tasse cups are the smallest thing on the table. They hold about 3 sips. 3 careful, very hot sips. The cups have their own saucers, their own tiny spoons, and their own place in the serving sequence, which Amy Vanderbilt has documented at some length. You don't pour the coffee at the table, that would be informal. The cups appear in the living room on a tray, each one already filled, already arranged, because a hostess who is visibly carrying a pot into a room is a hostess who looks like she's working. You are always working. The performance is that you are not. Meanwhile, the men have found the brandy. Your husband, Dennis, pours with the unhurried authority of someone who has had one job all evening and is very good at it. The conversation in that corner of the room gets slightly louder around the 15-minute mark. You hear the words Eisenhower, and then Chevrolet, and then nothing you can use. The women's conversation runs closer to the furniture and stays there, careful, circling, nothing dangerous. Politics is off the table. Religion is off the table. Money is absolutely off the table, which is a little ironic given that approximately $400 of equipment is currently sitting in your kitchen sink. The sink. It's not a sink. It's the third act. The guests leave around 10:30, with compliments that feel generous and specific, and you close the door and stand in your kitchen in front of 12 place settings of china, silver, and crystal, none of which can go in a machine because roughly 93% of American homes in 1960 don't have one. You wash the crystal first because it breaks, then the china, then the silver, which requires its own cloth and its own patience, and which has already been polished once this week, and is about to need polishing again. This takes 2 hours. 2 hours after a 3-day dinner party. alone in a kitchen that still smells like roasting meat and candle wax and someone else's perfume. Your Charlotte came out clean. Nobody mentioned it. One woman said the coffee was wonderful, which is the thing people say when the coffee is adequate and nothing else went wrong. You accept this the way you accept all of it, with a smile that costs nothing to look at and a great deal to maintain. You dry the last Demitasse cup, the one with the tiny spoon, and you set it back in its place in the cabinet. The candles are out. The centerpiece is starting to droop at one edge, the way flowers do when the evening is genuinely over. The tablecloth, ironed flat 3 days ago, will need ironing again before it goes back in the drawer. You turn off the kitchen light, same time next month probably. You consider the buffet, and the buffet is what you reach for when a full sit-down dinner is more than one person can physically serve alone. The food goes out on a table, hot dishes kept warm over small sterno flames, cold dishes arranged around them, plates stacked at one end, and the guests serve themselves. The books endorse it. It is gracious, they insist, and practical, and it quietly solves the problem of having no one to carry the plates. The faint, sweet smell of burning sterno drifts through the room, and the evening runs with less of you in constant motion. The buffet is, in its way, the self-checkout lane of the 1950s dinner party, invented to solve the exact same labour shortage and enjoyed by roughly the same number of people with genuine enthusiasm. Amy Vanderbilt gives it her blessing. Emily Post allows it. The women's magazines devote entire spreads to it, with photographs of gleaming chafing dishes and centerpieces and a hostess standing to one side looking serenely unbothered, which is also a performance, but a shorter one. Pricing out the buffet is its own exercise. It costs the same 3 days of preparation, the same polished silver, because the serving spoons have opinions about appearing in public unpolished. The same ironed linens, the same china, the same candles, white or ivory, mandatory. No exceptions even here, even now, even when the whole point is that you are relaxing. Meredith, who has been doing this since her first dinner in 1952, sets out the chafing dishes with the focused expression of a field medic deploying equipment. She adjusts the sterno height once. Then again, the flame, she has learned, will do what it wants regardless. The courses collapse, which is the actual relief. No fish course. No soup tureen. No standing in the kitchen rotating plates like an air traffic controller while the conversation in the other room continues without you. You are present for the whole evening. This is the buffet's quiet promise, and it mostly keeps it. You still made the rumaki, chicken livers, bacon, a water chestnut skewered somewhere in the middle, warm, salty, and faintly defiant. Because you always make the rumaki, and the rumaki is not negotiable even when everything else is simplified. The rumaki doesn't know it's a casual occasion. It has standards. Of course, there are trade-offs. A buffet is not a formal dinner, and anyone with Emily Post in her bookcase knows the difference and is silently registering it. The place cards are gone. The seating hierarchy is gone. Guests eat standing or perched on the edges of chairs, balancing plates with the structural confidence of someone who hasn't quite committed to sitting. Someone always stacks too much. Someone else takes the serving spoon from the wrong dish and puts it back in a different one, and the aspic. Yes, there is still an aspic, cold and shimmering and architecturally committed, lists slightly to one side for the rest of the evening. The aspic has not forgotten that it deserved a better occasion. The books call this format ideal for 12 to 20 guests, which is a way of saying it scales up where the formal dinner cannot. More people, less ceremony. The same underlying anxiety distributed across a longer table. You've spent $40 on food and supplies, which is roughly what it would cost to quietly not invite anyone at all and spend the weekend reading. But the neighbours are here, the sterno is burning, and someone is already complimenting the centerpiece. The centerpiece is still below eye level. Some things don't change. You wash everything by hand after the guests leave, because the dishwasher is a thing other people have. Almost no household owns one yet, and so the 12-place settings of china, the silver you spent a day polishing, the crystal in 3 different sizes, all of it comes back to the sink to be washed and dried and put away by you. The house is quiet now, the guests gone, your husband perhaps already in bed, and the work simply continues for another 2 hours in the dark kitchen. You started this meal 3 days ago. You finish it alone. The crystal goes first, because crystal is unforgiving and tired hands drop things. You hold each glass up to the window afterward, checking for spots, because a water spot on crystal is the kind of thing you notice 3 days later and feel personally responsible for. There are 24 of these. The water cools quickly. You add more hot from the kettle, which has been waiting on the stove like a small patient accomplice. Then the silver. You polished it yesterday, and it has repaid your labor by spending the evening being held by people who are not thinking about it at all. Now each fork comes back to you with traces of hollandaise or béarnaise, depending on what you served, and the salad dressing has already started to tarnish the tines slightly. The silver doesn't acknowledge this. It just waits to be polished again before the next dinner, which you are already mentally scheduling. There's a particular order to hand-washing 12-place settings. You learn it. Agnes Hartwell, who lives 2 streets over, does hers in the opposite order and has a chip in her gravy boat she doesn't talk about. The gravy boat knows how it happened. The china is the slow part. Each plate gets washed and rinsed and set in the rack and checked, because a formal dinner plate with a trace of beef juzz on the back is not a plate you put away. You put it back in the water. You've been standing since 4 o'clock this afternoon. Your feet have been standing since 4 o'clock this afternoon. They have opinions about this, and those opinions are not flattering. By the time you get to the serving dishes, the kitchen is warm, damp and close, and smells like dish soap and cooling candle wax and something meaty that's been on the stovetop since Tuesday. Somewhere in the dining room, the tablecloth still needs to be shaken out and soaked. White damask, 12 inches of overhang on every side, ironed flat before guests arrived, and now there's a red wine situation near the centre that you're choosing not to think about yet. The tablecloth is thinking about it, though. It's thinking about it very clearly. This is the part of the evening nobody writes a column about. The composure that held through the overcooked beef, through the spilled wine, through the guest who left 20 minutes too early, it doesn't switch off at the door. It just migrates to the sink. Standing here at 11:30 at night, both hands in cooling soapy water, you finally let it set down for the night. You dry the crystal with a linen cloth kept only for crystal. You dry the china with a different cloth. The silver gets its own cloth, because the silver always gets its own cloth. And somewhere in this house there is a drawer that contains 4 separate drying cloths organized by category, which is either very efficient or a sign of something you don't want to examine too closely. The last thing into the cabinet is always a demitasse cup. Small, delicate, the one your mother-in-law gave you from a set for 12 that she bought before the war. You set it in its place. You close the cabinet door, the kitchen is clean, the evening is over, you've been working on it since Monday. You wait in the days afterward for the verdict, because there is always a verdict, and it travels. The neighbourhood compares notes the way it compares everything else, and your dinner is now an item in that exchange. The food, the table, whether the evening flowed or stalled somewhere in the middle. You will hear pieces of it second-hand, filtered through who said what to whom. A good report lifts your standing on the street. A poor one settles in quietly and stays. You cannot ask anyone how it went. You can only listen for it coming back to you. The mechanism is a phone call, not from the guests themselves necessarily, but from someone who spoke to someone who was there. Peggy Halloran, 2 houses over, who wasn't invited but heard about the beef from Dottie Marsh, who was, and who has now formed a complete opinion based on a second-hand sentence spoken over a backyard fence on a Tuesday morning. Peggy has questions. She asks them as compliments. You recognize the architecture immediately. A good report mentions the table first, the candles, the cloth, whether the crystal caught the light the right way, because the table is the part that travelled visually in people's memories even before the food did. Then the food. Then whether the conversation moved without you having to push it. A good evening flows, meaning nobody noticed the 16 hours underneath it. That's the highest possible score. The labour disappears completely, and what remains is the impression that it all happened effortlessly, the way a swan moves across water while doing something extremely strenuous below the surface that no one is meant to see. A poor report is more specific. It names something. The soup was lukewarm. The salad arrived before the roast had fully rested. The centrepiece was too tall, a detail that seems microscopic until you realise it sat between 2 guests for 3 hours, and both of them noticed, which means they mentioned it, which means it is now a data point. The centrepiece has opinions about its own height. The Levittown layout makes the verdict harder to escape. Your neighbours have the same dining room you do, the same square footage, the same sightlines from the kitchen pass-through, the the same wall where the buffet either fits graciously or lists slightly to the left. They know exactly what your constraints are. There's nowhere to hide a bad arrangement behind architectural advantage. A Georgetown townhouse forgives certain staging decisions. Your Cape Cod on Elm Court does not. The husband gets none of this. His verdict came from the guests at the table, Liv, in the form of second helpings and appreciative sounds during the carving. His performance was witnessed and assessed in real time. Yours is evaluated in absentia, travelling through a network he'll never fully map, and arriving back to you in fragments over the next 2 weeks while you're at the grocery store or waiting for the school bus. Someone tells you it was lovely. You smile. You calculate what lovely means coming from that particular person at this particular moment. Lovely is not the same as perfect. Lovely has texture. You know the texture. A good party doesn't move you forward. It only confirms the baseline. You threw the dinner, it went well, and all you've done is stay exactly where you were. The next party is the real test, which means there's always a next party, and the preparation for it has already, very quietly, begun. The tablecloth is folded back in the linen cupboard. The silver is back in its flannel roll. The crystal is back on the shelf, clean, quiet, and faintly smug, doing absolutely nothing, waiting to be needed again. And somewhere 2 houses over, Peggy Halloran is telling someone the beef was very good actually, which is nearly perfect, which is enough, which will have to do. You receive an invitation in return, and the cycle you started begins again from the other side. The Hendersons, whom you owed, are now repaid, which means the Caldwells you just hosted will soon feel that they owe you, and somewhere a card is already being written. The ledger never closes. Every dinner you give obligates someone to give one back, and every dinner you attend obligates you in turn, and the whole street keeps a running account that no one is permitted to settle and walk away from. You look at the new card on the table. You reach for the calendar again. The invitation itself is a document. Amy Vanderbilt has opinions about this, and she will share them across several pages of her 1952 guide, which sold 650,000 copies in its first year, because apparently a very large number of people needed to be told how to word a card. The wording is third person and formal. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson request the pleasure of your company. Not, we'd love to have you. Not, come over Saturday. The third person creates a small, pleasant fiction that the invitation was composed by an institution rather than a woman sitting at a writing desk while something simmers on the stove. The envelope arrives on a Tuesday. You have 2 days to reply in writing. This is not a suggestion. The written RSVP within 48 hours is documented etiquette law, and the hostess on the other end is watching the mail with the focused attention of someone awaiting a verdict. The neighborhood has an information infrastructure for exactly this kind of thing. It runs on coffee and impeccable timing. Receiving this invitation means something specific. It means the Hendersons have committed to 12 to 16 hours of preparation across the next 2 to 3 days. It means someone in that house will spend Friday morning on their knees with a tin of silvo and a chamois, working through 12-place settings of silver, fork by fork, exactly the way you did on Friday. The silver has its own timeline. Doris Henderson, who does not have help, has already planned the menu in her head. Shrimp cocktail to open, suspended in stemmed glasses like tiny pink chandeliers, cold, firm, and faintly defensive. A beef tenderloin, because it's 1957 and beef is the vocabulary you speak when you want to say something serious. She's considered the salad, French vinaigrette, not ranch, which is still a California curiosity that hasn't made it to respectable tables, and she's already decided on the gelatin mold because the Kraft advertisement in last month's Ladies' Home Journal made it look genuinely elegant, and she is not yet in a position to disagree. The mold contains shrimp, celery, and a confidence that has nothing to do with the taste. The guest list will be 8. 6 is insufficiently festive. More than 12 becomes unmanageable without hired help, and hiring a maid for the evening runs $5 to $8, which is a real calculation against a food budget of $30 to $50 for the whole event. 8 is the number that fits the table, fills the room, and keeps the conversation from fragmenting into separate audiences. 8 is the answer every time. You write your reply on notepaper, not a card. You use ink. You confirm that Mr. and Mrs., meaning you and your husband, who will spend most of Saturday evening mixing old fashions near the drinks cart and then carving the roast with ceremonial focus, that you will attend with pleasure. You seal the envelope. You walk it to the mailbox. The calendar now shows a Saturday circled in pencil. Between now and then, the Hendersons will do the work, and you will arrive at 7:30 looking rested, which is the final courtesy. You will eat the gelatin mold without comment. You will compliment the tenderloin. You will not discuss religion, politics, money, or illness, all of which are formally off the table along with the ranch dressing. The ledger records it either way. You hold the smile through all of it, because the smile is part of the job and possibly the hardest part of it. The exhaustion does not show. The 3 days of labor do not show. The arithmetic running constantly behind your eyes, the timing, the money, the seating, the verdict, none of it is allowed to reach your face. Later in this decade, a writer will interview women like you and find, underneath the composure, something none of them quite has a word for yet. For now, there is no word. There is only the next dinner and the smile you put on for it. What it actually costs is more than the food. Not the $30 to $50 in food and supplies, though that's real, roughly a week's grocery budget, gone in a single evening. The underlying equipment runs $500 to $2,000 in 1950s dollars. The china, the silver, the crystal, the damask cloth ironed flat and hanging exactly 12 inches over every edge. You assembled most of it before you moved in, piece by piece, via a wedding registry treated less like a wish list and more like a business capitalization plan. You could not begin adult life without complete settings for 12. You could not begin it with 11. The silver alone has opinions. It judges the calendar, specifically the 2 days before any party, when you're on your knees with a tin of silvo and a chamois cloth, working the tarnish out of 48 individual forks. A scullery maid in a grander house had ceremonial duties and, with any luck, a day off. You have Goddard's silver foam and a deadline. The smell fills every room, sharp, chalky, and faintly chemical. A smell the children will associate with their mother's stress for the rest of their lives without being able to explain why. Now consider Doris Hartwell, who hosts the third Friday of every month and has developed a system. She polishes counterclockwise. She says it's faster. Her neighbour Patrice has watched her do it for 2 years and remains unconvinced, but Patrice has never said so, because the silverware at Doris's table comes out perfect, and perfection earns the right to a method nobody questions. The math gets quietly brutal the morning after. After the last guest has gone and your husband has gone to bed, you stand at the sink and wash 12 place settings of china, silver, and crystal by hand. In 1960, 7% of American homes have a dishwasher. Yours is not one of them. The machine hasn't arrived yet. The labor has. Betty Friedan will spend 3 years, 1957 to 1960, interviewing women who live inside this exact evening. She'll find the anxiety, the perfectionism, and the specific hollowness that arrives right after the applause does. She won't have a tidy word for it, and neither will you. What you have instead is the Hendersons' reciprocal dinner, which arrives in 6 weeks. The smile holds because it has to. It held through the overcooked beef. It held through the guest who arrived without replying and the one who left without a coat. It holds the way the tablecloth holds its crease, under pressure, by design, and without ever once being asked whether it minds. The smile is the last course. It's served after the demitasse, after the men have drifted off with their brandy and their slightly louder opinions, after the candles have burned down to white stubs. It is maintained through the goodbyes at the door, the compliments, the small insincerities exchanged in coats. It stays on until the last car pulls away. Then the door closes. The kitchen is still there. The sink is still there. The 48 forks are waiting. You put on the radio because silence is worse, and you begin. You begin, slowly, to notice the rules loosening, though it happens too gradually to point at a single day. More women are taking jobs, which leaves fewer hours for 3-day dinners. A new cook on television is saying, cheerfully, that mistakes in the kitchen are survivable and a dropped dish is not a catastrophe. The books are still on the counter, but you open them a little less often than you used to. The formal evening with its 12 forks does not end all at once. It just stops being the only acceptable way to have people over, and you feel the difference before you can name it. Julia Child's show premieres in 1963. She spills things. She laughs. She picks something up off the counter and continues without apology, which is possibly the most radical act broadcast into a suburban kitchen in the entire post-war period. The women who've been treating every dinner party like a doctoral dissertation defense watch her dust flower off her sleeve and feel something release, very slightly, in their chests. The workforce numbers shift underneath the whole arrangement. In 1950, 32% of women are employed outside the home. By 1970, that number is 43%. That's not a cultural trend. That's a missing Tuesday, a missing Wednesday, a missing Thursday, which is exactly when the silver needs polishing and the gelatin needs to set. The 12 to 16-hour preparation window doesn't shrink. It just stops fitting inside the available calendar. Betty Friedan's book arrives in 1963, and it puts a name to something a lot of women have been standing next to at the sink at midnight for years without being able to describe. The dinner party doesn't appear on the cover, but it's in there, folded into every page about performance and exhaustion, and the peculiar loneliness of being looked at all evening without being seen. Margaret, who lives 4 houses down and once spent 11 hours on an aspic nobody touched, reads it in 2 days and doesn't throw a dinner party for 8 months. She doesn't announce this. She just doesn't. The Etiquette books keep selling. Emily Post reaches her 10th edition in 1960, still specifying the exact angle of the fish fork, still very confident about ivory candles. The books don't disappear. They just stop feeling like law and start feeling like one option among several, which is a demotion they handle with characteristic dignity and absolutely no self-awareness. Casual dinners rise to fill the space. Fewer courses. A bottle of wine open on the table instead of a husband presenting a Manhattan with the seriousness of a field surgeon. People eating off plates that don't match, which in 1955 would have been a quiet emergency and in 1966 is being described in women's magazines as charming. The centerpiece flowers are allowed to be tall now, blocking the view across the table, which means the guests have to lean sideways to see each other, which means the conversation gets closer and louder and considerably less supervised. Nobody holds a ceremony to retire the white damask tablecloth. It goes into a drawer, then a lower drawer, then a box. Then, somewhere in that box, probably still perfectly ironed, folded, stiff, and faintly resentful, hanging exactly 12 to 18 inches over every edge, waiting for a dinner party that's been rescheduled since 1967. The silver is in there too. The silvo is under the sink. It still smells like chalk and mild industrial regret. What you're left with, standing on the other side of all of it, is a decade-long project of making people comfortable by making yourself invisible, and the quiet, ordinary relief of putting that project down. The 12 forks are still somewhere. You know exactly where they are. You just don't always need them anymore. You spent 3 days measuring a tablecloth with a ruler, polishing 12 forks per person, and building a gelatin mold around a single shrimp that you served with a completely straight face. You smiled through the cocktail hour with a tray of rumaki. You cleared the plates without blinking when a guest announced the beef was overcooked. You washed every last piece of china by hand at midnight, alone, and you did all of it so the whole evening would look effortless. The women who actually did this were not performing. They were exhausted and precise and very good at it, and they held the entire impossible standard up for years without once being allowed to look tired. The ones who cleaned the houses and served the tables and slipped out before the last course did it too, and nobody wrote their names down. So let your shoulders drop, let the kitchen stay dark, let the silver sit untouched on the counter, just for tonight, and feel your breathing slow. Sleep well.